As always, hello, welcome. I'm glad that you're with us as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. Today we're going to read we're going to read a half a dozen Psalms, and you'll see in these Psalms the stress of the situation that King David is presently in. First Psalm that we're going to read is Psalm 3. Psalm 3 is a psalm of lament. It's a call to God in distress as King David flees from his son Absalom, who's attempting a coup. The psalm is structured in three strophes or units. The first strophe, verses 1 through 3, describes David's need. The second, verses 4 through 6, describes David's confidence in God. And the last, verses 7 through 8, articulates David's prayer of and for deliverance. As you read this psalm, allow yourself to be drawn in by it. Surely at one time or another you have felt as David does. Maybe you feel that way even now. Well, cry out with David your confidence in the Lord to save you, casting all your anxieties, all your cares on him, for he cares for you, we're told in 1 Peter. And then, having done that, rest peacefully in the Lord, who will save you, indeed, who has already saved you. The second of our Psalms for today is Psalm 4. It's also a psalm of lament. Indeed, the situation that David finds himself in is very similar to that of Psalm 3. This psalm 4 offers a prayer to God in verse 1. It asks for a rebuke to David's enemies, or it offers a rebuke to David's enemies in verse 2. It gives advice for David's friends who are suffering with him, verses 3 to 5. And then there's a closing prayer of confidence and peace. You might want to mark this psalm for days when you despair that all hope is lost. Follow David's advice for his friends. Fear not to be angry, but do not sin in it. Put your trust in the Lord and know that he lifts his countenance upon you. Then go about your day, or if you're reading it in the evening, your sleep in peace. The third psalm for today is Psalm 12. It too is a lament. David mourns the duplicity and the unfaithfulness of men, especially in the things they say. No physical harm here is mentioned, but the effect of slander or other falsity is very, very clear. The psalm opens with a prayer, followed by a promise, followed by another prayer. We see the difference between proud words and pure words. It's easy to see King David writing this during the days his son Absalom was spreading lies about him as Absalom tried to wrest the kingdom from his father. Luther speaks of teachers who constantly make up doctrines that load the conscience down. But then from this psalm, take comfort that God's salvation will awaken us to the truth. For you, O Lord, will keep them. May this psalm also give you peace and comfort and courage as you oppose all the false doctrines, the false prophecies, the false teachings of the world that surrounds you. And then, of course, it's four in a row. Psalm 13 is yet another psalm of lament, yet another psalm we can relate to. How long, O Lord, how long? In reading this psalm, you'll find a foretaste of Psalm 22 that opens, my God, why have you forsaken me? We all at times feel as though we've been abandoned by one person, thing, or by a person, or one thing or another. But nothing is so devastating as when we feel that we've been abandoned by God. In Luther's comments on this psalm, he reminds us of the words of James chapter 5, where we're told that if anyone suffers, let him pray. So we pray. We pray with King David, especially the last verse of this psalm. For if I trust in your faithfulness, my heart will exult in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord, for he has done good for me. But the confidence in God's faithfulness here expressed pull you out of your feelings of abandonment. You have God's promise that he will never leave you or forsake you. Cling to it and allow it to draw you out of this time of temptation to doubt God's presence. In times of despair, David calls out to God, his rock and his fortress. Notice in this next psalm, David's prayer for deliverance from his enemies. Notice again how David asserts that his enemies are God's enemies, opposing the will and promises of God. And notice how David ends by praying for all of God's people, not just himself, but all of God's people. David's constant reference to the Lord as his strength and shield reminds us that we cannot navigate our lives apart from God either. It is God who deals with, who leads us on level paths and protects us from the adversary. And it is God who delivers us. It's possible that the eloquence of our next psalm, Psalm 55, is related to the personal nature of the betrayal that it tells us of. Likely the betrayal of, of David's friend and advisor Ahithophel at the time of Absalom's rebellion. Actually, a double betrayal described to us, and that we read in our reading just yesterday, or the last day that you were reading this. Possibly the depth of David's hurt at the betrayals may be seen in verses 6 through 8, where David uncharacteristically desires to flee from his conflict, to flee away like a dove. Having heard an initial plea to God in verses 1 and 2, David elaborates the problem through verses 14 and then pleads for judgment against his enemies in verse 15. David expresses confidence in God's judgment in verses 16 to 19, and then again speaks of the treachery that besieges him in verses 20 and 21. The psalm ends with God's solution that we cast our cares on him who will sustain us. The psalm closes with David's confession that he will indeed trust in God. May you make that same confession. Again, I pray that our time together strengthens you and that you grow as we read, as we see these Psalms now in the light of what's going on in David's life as well. May God be with you and bless you. Look forward to joining with you again tomorrow.